A quiet 10-year-old girl in a simple dress stood nervously at the edge of a lavish wedding, holding a bouquet of white roses. Her name was Alana. The bride, a vision in a glittering gown, spun around, her smile vanishing like a popped bubble. Her voice was a whip crack. "You!" she shouted, pointing a finger. "You're ruining every photo!" Guests gasped. The camera flashes stopped. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, her small world crumbling. What no one at that wedding knew was that this ordinary-looking child was the daughter of a billionaire CEO, a man who owned the very ground they stood on, and in just a few minutes she would return. Not with tears, but with a $5 million check that would drain the blood from the bride's face, leaving her speechless, pale, and begging for a forgiveness she would never receive. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The Rosewood Estate was a fantasy brought to life. Fountains danced in the sunlight, sending arcs of sparkling water into the air. Manicured lawns stretched out like green carpets, dotted with ancient oak trees draped in fairy lights. Champagne flutes clinked together, a sound like tiny bells ringing in celebration. It was a place built for dreams, and today it was the backdrop for Rachel Whitmore's perfect dream. At 29 years old, Rachel was a woman who believed she deserved perfection. Her dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace, cost $40,000. Her hair was styled by a celebrity artist, and her smile was practiced, designed for the cameras that followed her every move. She stood on a stone terrace overlooking a serene lake, posing for her photographer. The sun caught the diamonds on her necklace, scattering rainbows across her skin. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then her smile froze. It didn't just fade, it shattered. At the edge of the frame, almost hidden by a large floral arrangement, stood a small black girl. The girl, Alana Carter, clutched a bouquet of leftover flowers, her dark eyes wide with a mix of awe and nervousness. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a flower girl. She was just there. Rachel's voice, which had been sweet and melodic moments before, turned sharp and cold. "Who is that?" she demanded, not to anyone in particular, but to the world itself. The photographer lowered his camera, confused. He hadn't even noticed the child. "Who let her in here?" Rachel's voice rose, cutting through the happy chatter of the guests nearby. "She's ruining every single shot." The air went still. The gentle hum of conversation stopped. Dozens of pairs of eyes turned first to Rachel, then to the small girl who now looked like a deer caught in headlights. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. A few jaws literally dropped. This wasn't part of the perfect wedding script. Rachel didn't wait for an answer. She marched across the terrace, her expensive gown swishing with angry energy. She stopped in front of Alana, looming over her. The little girl shrank back, her small shoulders curling inward. Rachel didn't speak to her. She spoke at her. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. Before Alana could find her voice, Rachel snatched the bouquet from her hands. The flowers weren't part of the official wedding decor, just some extras the florist had given the girl. Rachel didn't care. She tossed the bouquet aside as if it were trash, the white petals scattered across the stone ground. "This is not a daycare," Rachel sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is my wedding, my perfect day. Now take her out of my sight before she ruins the whole thing." Alana's lower lip began to tremble. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. I was just trying to help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her dress was simple, a plain cotton sundress that was neat and clean, but a world away from the designer outfits worn by the guests. Rachel's eyes raked over the simple dress, a cruel smirk forming on her lips. "Helping? Look at you," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're completely out of place here." Some of the guests, the ones who always followed Rachel's lead, let out nervous, tittering chuckles. Others, however, looked away, a deep sense of shame coloring their faces. They saw a bride, beautiful on the outside, revealing an ugly soul. Alana couldn't hold back her sobs any longer. A humiliated sniffle turned into a quiet cry. She turned and ran, her small feet pattering against the stone as she disappeared from the terrace. She didn't want anyone to see her tears. Rachel watched her go, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. Then she turned back to the photographer, her perfect smile clicking back into place as if nothing had happened. "All right," she announced brightly. "Where were we? Let's get the shot." But the magic was gone. The air was thick with discomfort, and the beautiful day at Rosewood Estate was now stained with an act of casual cruelty. The mood on the terrace had shifted. The champagne suddenly seemed less bubbly, the sun a little less warm. Guests murmured to each other in low tones, their eyes darting towards Rachel, who was once again smiling for the camera, as if she hadn't just crushed a child's spirit. The joy felt brittle, forced. Among the staff, a young waitress named Emma Lawson felt a hot knot of anger tighten in her stomach. She had seen the whole thing from her post near the drink station. She had watched Rachel's beautiful face twist into something ugly, had seen the little girl's innocent delight turn to heartbroken fear. It was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Emma bit her lip, her mind racing. What could she do? She was just a junior waitress, working a weekend gig to pay for her college textbooks. Rachel Whitmore was rich, powerful, and, as she had just demonstrated, ruthless. Complaining would get her fired at best. Still, the image of Alana's tear-streaked face was burned into her mind. Kelsey, Rachel's maid of honor, hurried over to the bride between shots. She leaned in close, her voice a nervous whisper. "Rachel, that was a bit much," she said, her eyes flicking towards the guests who were now openly staring. "You didn't have to go that far," Rachel scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Please, Kelsey, this is my day, my one day. I've spent over $100,000 on this event. No random scruffy kid is going to wander into my photos and ruin them." She adjusted a stray piece of hair. "It's about standards, aesthetics." A few of the bridesmaids nodded in agreement, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. As the photo shoot resumed, a few people started a weak, hesitant round of applause, a desperate attempt to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. Emma set down her tray of empty glasses. She couldn't just stand there. She had to find the little girl. She scanned the sprawling lawns, her eyes searching past the clusters of gossiping guests, and then she saw her. Tucked away on a stone bench under a weeping willow tree, far from the party, was Alana. She was curled into a small ball, her face buried in her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emma's heart clenched. She walked over slowly, her footsteps soft on the grass. "Hey," she said gently, her voice barely a whisper. Alana looked up, her face puffy and red, fresh tears glistening on her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, as if embarrassed to be caught crying. Emma knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. "I saw what happened back there," she said. "That was not okay. You didn't ruin anything. She did." Alana looked at the kind face of the waitress, a stranger who was showing her more compassion than anyone at the party. She hates me," Alana murmured, her voice thick with sadness. "She said I was out of place." "She's wrong," Emma said firmly. "You're not out of place. She is. Her heart is out of place." Emma felt a surge of protectiveness. This child, whoever she was, didn't deserve this. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. For a moment, Emma had no idea what to do. She was just a waitress, and that woman was the bride, the queen of this entire event. But as she looked at Alana's defeated expression, she knew she couldn't let it go. She didn't know who this little girl was, where she had come from, or why she was there alone. All Emma knew was that a wrong had been committed, and it needed to be made right. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was being watched, or that she was sitting next to the most powerful person on the entire estate. 48 hours before the wedding, the world looked very different for Alana Carter. She wasn't a girl in a simple cotton dress, but the beloved only daughter of Samuel Carter. Samuel was a cool titan, a self-made black billionaire whose company, Carter Holdings, had built or bought half the city's skyline. He was a man who moved markets with a single phone call, whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and respect in boardrooms across the country. But to Alana, he was just Dad. They were in his office, a vast space on the top floor of the Carter Holdings tower. The room was all glass and steel, with a view that stretched to the horizon. But Alana wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at a set of blueprints spread across her father's massive desk. The blueprints were for the Rosewood estate. "It's so pretty, Daddy," she said, tracing the lines of the gardens with her small finger. "It is," Samuel agreed, his voice a warm, deep rumble. "And next month, it will be ours." Carter Holdings was in the final stages of acquiring the estate, adding it to their portfolio of luxury properties. Samuel wasn't just teaching his daughter about business. He was teaching her about life. He had grown up with nothing, and he was determined that Alana would understand the value of humility and empathy, two things that money could not buy. "Power means nothing if you forget how other people live, sweetheart," he often told her. "The moment you start looking down on someone, you've already lost." This weekend was meant to be one of those lessons. A large, extravagant wedding was being held at Rosewood, and Alana had come up with an idea. "Daddy, can I help?" she had asked a few days prior. "I want to see what it's like. You know, real work." Samuel had been hesitant at first. His daughter, volunteering. But he saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes. He knew this was a chance to teach her something a textbook never could. So he had made a deal with the head florist, a woman who had worked with his company for years and could be trusted to keep a secret. Alana would spend the weekend as a volunteer helper, an anonymous face in the crowd. "I love it," Alana had exclaimed, her face lighting up. "It'll be our secret." Samuel had smiled. "All right," he said, "but there's one very important rule." He leaned in, his expression serious. "No one there can know who you are. Not the manager, not the staff, not the wedding party. You'll just be Alana. You'll be treated like everyone else. Do you understand?" "I understand," Alana had promised, her eyes shining with excitement. She didn't want special treatment. She wanted to be a part of the magic, to see how a place like Rosewood came to life. She wanted to feel useful, to contribute in a small way to someone else's happy day. The idea of being a secret princess, hidden in plain sight, was a grand adventure. She packed a small bag with her simplest clothes, leaving behind the designer labels her father sometimes bought for her. She was ready to work. Samuel felt a swell of pride. His daughter had a good heart. This lesson, he thought, would teach her about the dignity of labor and the importance of seeing the world from a different perspective. He had no way of knowing it would also teach her a much harsher lesson about the cruelty of prejudice and the arrogance of the powerful. The morning of the wedding arrived, bright and clear. The air at Rosewood Estate was filled with the sweet scent of roses and the busy hum of preparations. Alana was up at dawn, her heart thrumming with excitement. She wore a simple blue sundress and sneakers, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She looked nothing like the heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire. She looked like a happy, helpful 10-year-old girl. Samuel Carter watched her from a distance, a small, proud smile on his face. He stood near the edge of the property, dressed in a casual polo shirt and slacks, looking more like a groundskeeper than a CEO. He saw Alana carefully helping the florists, her small hands gently arranging petals in a vase. He saw the genuine joy on her face as she worked, the way she listened intently to instructions. He walked over to her as she was taking a short break. "Having fun?" he asked, his voice low. Alana beamed, her face smudged with a bit of pollen. "It's the best, Daddy. I helped make the big centerpiece for the main table, and Mrs. Gable, the florist, said I have a good eye for color." Samuel's smile widened. He knelt down, brushing the smudge from her cheek. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," he said. He then looked into her eyes, his expression turning a little more serious. "Remember what we talked about," he said gently. "Today, you will meet many different kinds of people. Some will be kind. But some people judge before they understand. They might see your simple dress or the color of your skin and make up their minds about you before you even speak." Alana nodded solemnly. "I know, Daddy." "If that happens," he continued, "I want you to stay kind. Don't let their bitterness change your sweetness. That's your real power." He kissed her on the forehead. "I have a few meetings, but my driver will be waiting for you at the front gate whenever you're ready to leave. Just call me." "Okay, Daddy, I love you," she said, giving him a quick, fierce hug. "I love you too, Starlight." With that, he left her to her tasks, confident that his daughter was safe and learning a valuable lesson. And she was. Alana spent the next few hours in a state of blissful industry. She carried small bouquets from the prep tent to the reception hall. She handed out bottles of water to the sweating setup crew. She helped pick up stray leaves and stems, keeping the work area tidy. The staff treated her with a sort of casual kindness. They saw a quiet, well-behaved kid who was eager to help, and they appreciated the extra set of hands. No one gave her a second glance. No one suspected that the little girl in the plain blue dress was the future owner of the entire estate. They didn't know that every tree she walked past, every stone path she trod upon would one day belong to her. Them, she was just a helper, anonymous, invisible. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction in the work, in being a small, unnoticed part of a big, important day. It was a perfect morning. Until the bride saw her. Back on the stone bench under the weeping willow, Emma handed Alana a small napkin she had tucked into her apron pocket. Alana took it and dabbed at her eyes, her sobs slowly subsiding into quiet sniffles. "I really was just trying to help," Alana repeated, her voice small and wobbly. "The florist said I could take some of the extra flowers so they wouldn't go to waste. I thought they were pretty." "They are pretty," Emma said, looking at the scattered white petals on the terrace in the distance. "And you were being kind. That woman, she was not." Emma's mind was a whirlwind of anger and frustration. She knew Rachel Whitmore's type. She had served them at countless events. People who believed their money and status gave them a license to treat others as if they were invisible, as if their feelings didn't matter. But to do it to a child? That was a new level of cruelty. "If you want," Emma whispered, leaning in closer, "I can go and tell the venue manager what she did. It's not right. She shouldn't be allowed to treat people like that." Alana looked up, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "No, please don't," she said, shaking her head. "It's okay. I don't want to cause any trouble." Emma understood. The girl was scared. She probably thought she was the one who was in the wrong, that she was the one who would get into trouble. Rachel had made her feel that small. But Emma wasn't convinced. A fire had been lit inside her, a sense of righteous indignation that she couldn't ignore. She wasn't going to let this go. As she sat there comforting the child, an idea formed in her mind. It was risky, but it felt necessary. She saw Rachel back on the terrace, laughing now, posing dramatically with her new husband. The bride was a caricature of vanity, her head thrown back in a fake theatrical laugh. The contrast between that woman's arrogant joy and this little girl's silent tears was sickening. Quietly, Emma pulled out her phone. She angled it carefully, pretending to be checking a message. With a steady hand, she zoomed in on Rachel. She couldn't get a clear shot of the initial confrontation, but she could capture the aftermath. She snapped a few photos of Rachel preening for the camera, the picture of unbothered privilege. While just a few hundred feet away, the evidence of her cruelty was still visible in the form of a crying child. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was proof. People like her, Emma muttered under her breath so low that Alana couldn't hear. They think they can get away with anything. They shouldn't. She put her phone away, her decision made. She didn't know how, but she was going to make sure that what happened here today did not go unnoticed. She would be a witness. She would be this little girl's voice, even if Alana was too afraid to speak for herself. Emma put a comforting arm around Alana's shoulder. You know what? Let's get you some lemonade. My treat. She helped the little girl to her feet, leading her away from the willow tree and towards the staff area, away from the prying eyes of the wedding guests. She was just a waitress, but in that moment, she was an ally. Meanwhile, back in the center of the storm she had created, Rachel Whitmore was basking in the attention. The incident with the child was already fading from her mind, a minor annoyance that had been swiftly dealt with. She was now surrounded by her bridesmaids, sipping a glass of the finest champagne, her laughter echoing across the terrace. Can you believe the nerve of that kid? She said, recounting the story with dramatic flair. Just wandering into my photo shoot like she owned the place. I had to put her in her place. Her bridesmaids, a chorus of women in pale pink dresses, giggled and nodded. You were amazing, Rachel, one of them said. So assertive. Rachel took a delicate sip of her champagne. I mean, did you see that dress she was wearing? She sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. It looked like something a maid's child would wear. She looked like someone's charity case wandered into a royal wedding. This elicited another round of sycophantic laughter. Her fiancé, Evan, stood slightly apart from the group, a frown creasing his handsome face. He had seen the whole thing, and while he hadn't dared to contradict Rachel in public, he felt a sour twist in his gut. He knew she could be difficult, but this was different. This was just mean. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Maybe you were a little harsh, honey, he said quietly, trying not to provoke her. Rachel turned her sharp gaze on him. Harsh? Evan, darling, this is not the time to go soft. This day is about us. It's about perfection. I will not have it tainted by that. Her gesture was vague but dismissive, encompassing everything she found beneath her. The guests nearby could hear snippets of the conversation. They exchanged uneasy glances, their polite smiles not quite masking their disapproval. They had all witnessed Rachel's outburst. They had seen the child run away in tears, and now hearing her brag about it, hearing her mock the girl's clothes and her presence, turned their discomfort into quiet disgust. But no one said a word. Rachel was the bride. She was from a wealthy family, marrying into another. To challenge her was to invite social suicide. So they kept their opinions to themselves, their silence a form of passive agreement. Rachel, oblivious to the changing atmosphere, doubled down. I don't care whose kid she is, she declared loudly, wanting to make her point crystal clear. She could be the janitor's daughter for all I care. I don't want that kind of mess in my wedding pictures. End of story. Her arrogance was absolute. She was so insulated by her wealth and privilege that she couldn't imagine a world where her actions might have consequences. She couldn't conceive of a scenario where the small, insignificant girl she had just humiliated could hold any power over her. In her mind, she was the queen of this castle, and everyone else was just a part of the scenery. The trap was closing around her, silent and unseen. Every cruel word she spoke was another bar in the cage she was unknowingly building for herself. The champagne in her glass sparkled, but the day was losing its shine. The world Rachel Whitmore inhabited was small and self-contained, but the world outside her bubble was moving at the speed of light. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that her cruel outburst had not gone entirely unnoticed. One of the junior caterers, a young man named Leo who was working near the terrace, had his phone out, live streaming a short clip of the beautiful venue for his social media followers. He had inadvertently caught the tail end of Rachel's rant. He captured her sneering face, her dismissive gesture, and the sight of Alana running away in tears. Thinking it was just some Bridezilla drama, he posted the 30-second clip with a simple caption, "Things are getting tense at the fancy wedding." He had no idea of the firestorm he was about to ignite. Within minutes, the clip began to circulate among the event staff. Phones buzzed in the pockets of waiters, busboys, and kitchen staff. Whispers rippled through the behind-the-scenes chaos of the wedding. "Did you see this? That's the bride from today. She yelled at a little girl? Seriously?" The whispers soon spread to the guests. A cousin of the groom saw the clip on her feed and gasped, showing it to the person next to her. Soon, small clusters of people were huddled over their phones, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. The story was spreading faster than a virus. Far away from the manicured lawns of Rosewood Estate, in the silent, air-conditioned calm of his high-rise office, Samuel Carter's phone buzzed. He was in the middle of a conference call, but he glanced at the screen. It was a message from his head of security, a man he trusted implicitly. The message contained a link to the video clip and a simple, chilling text. "Sir, this is from Rosewood. The child is Alana." Samuel's blood ran cold. He excused himself from the conference call, his voice calm and steady, betraying none of the fury that was building within him. He clicked the link. He watched the video once. He saw his daughter's small, retreating back. He saw the bride's smug, triumphant face. He heard her words, dripping with scorn, echoing in the pristine quiet of his office. He watched it a second time, and his eyes, usually warm and compassionate, hardened into chips of obsidian. A stillness fell over him. It was the calm before a hurricane. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Maria," he said to his executive assistant, his voice dangerously low, "clear my schedule for the rest of the day, all of it." "Yes, Mr. Carter," she replied, sensing the gravity in his tone. He then dialed his chief legal counsel. "David," he said, "I need you to get the entire acquisitions team on a call, now. We are moving up the timeline on the Rosewood purchase. I want it done today." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Today, sir? The contracts aren't finalized." "Finalize them," Samuel commanded. "I'll be at Rosewood in an hour." His final call was to the general manager of the Rosewood Estate, a man who had no idea that his company's largest client was about to become his new boss. "Mr. Davies," Samuel said, his voice a blade of ice. "This is Samuel Carter. I want every single board member of the estate management company on site by noon. No excuses. We have a serious matter to discuss." Mr. Davies, flustered by the unexpected and urgent summons, could only stammer, "Of course, Mr. Carter, right away." Samuel Carter hung up the phone. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city he had helped to build. The lesson he had intended for his daughter about humility had taken a dark turn. Now, it was time for a different lesson. A lesson for Rachel Whitmore. A lesson about consequences. Samuel Carter did not rage. He did not shout. Men of his power and stature understood that true strength was not in noise, but in decisive, calculated action. He sat in his office, the video of his daughter's humiliation playing on a loop in his mind, and he began to move his pieces across the chessboard. His first call was not to his lawyers or his security team, but to the full board of directors of Carter Holdings. He convened an emergency virtual meeting. Within minutes, the faces of the most powerful executives in the city appeared on the large screen in his office. They looked concerned, knowing that a summons like this meant something significant had happened. "Good morning," Samuel began, his voice devoid of emotion. It was this unnerving calm that always signaled to his team that he was at his most dangerous. "We have an incident at the Rosewood Estate." He didn't show them the video. He didn't need to appeal to their emotions. He dealt in facts and strategy. "A potential liability has arisen during a private event. A minor was publicly humiliated by a client. That minor," he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. Was my daughter, the future majority owner of Carter Holdings. A collective intake of breath could be heard from the board members. Their faces shifted from concern to alarm. An insult to Samuel Carter was a business problem. An insult to his daughter, his heir, was a declaration of war. As you know, Samuel continued, his voice as smooth and hard as granite, we were scheduled to close the acquisition of Rosewood next month. We are accelerating that timeline. The deal will close today. I want all necessary paperwork prepared and dispatched for my signature within the hour. His chief financial officer spoke up, his voice hesitant. Samuel, the financials. Are we sure this is the right move? A rush job could expose us. The financials are irrelevant, Samuel cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is no longer a financial transaction. It is a strategic one. I want the venue sale agreement ready. I will sign it the moment I arrive at the estate. One of the older board members, a man who had known Samuel for 20 years, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Do you want us to have the wedding canceled, Samuel? We can have security clear the premises immediately. A flicker of something cold and sharp appeared in Samuel's eyes. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. Let it finish. Let them have their ceremony. Let them cut their cake and drink their champagne. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the camera. I want everyone there. I want the guests, the staff, and the happy couple to be present when the truth comes out. Humiliation, I find, is a lesson best taught in public. The board members nodded in grim understanding. They had seen Samuel Carter dismantle business rivals with surgical precision. They were about to see him do the same to a 29-year-old bride. The meeting was adjourned. Samuel stood, straightened his tie, and walked towards the door. His driver was already waiting downstairs. The lesson for Alana had been about humility. The lesson for Rachel was about to be about gravity, about how quickly one can fall when they believe they are flying above everyone else. The wedding ceremony proceeded, but the soul had gone out of it. The vows were exchanged under a beautiful floral arch, but the words felt hollow. The guests clapped, but the sound was muted, obligatory. The cloud of Rachel's earlier cruelty lingered over the event, a pall that no amount of expensive champagne could wash away. Rachel herself seemed oblivious, lost in her own fairy tale. She kissed her new husband, Evan, for the cameras, her smile wide and dazzling. Evan, however, looked strained. The joy he should have been feeling was replaced by a gnawing anxiety. He had seen the whispers, the sideways glances from their guests. He knew Rachel had crossed a line, and the unease in the air was suffocating. After the ceremony, as guests began to mingle on the lawn for the cocktail hour, the first sign that the world was tilting on its axis appeared. Several discreet, professional-looking staff members, dressed in the formal black uniforms of the estate's management team, began to move through the crowd. They approached Rachel and Evan, their expressions polite but firm. Mr. and Mrs. Morrow, one of them said, addressing Evan by his last name. Pardon the interruption. The owner of the estate would like to have a word with you. Rachel frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. The owner? Now? We're in the middle of our reception. She waved a dismissive hand. Whatever it is, tell them to send us a bill. The staff member did not flinch. I'm afraid he was very specific, ma'am. He requests your presence in the main hall immediately. Rachel rolled her eyes. This was just the kind of petty inconvenience she despised. She was probably being called in to sign some extra paperwork, or to be upsold on some ridiculous champagne package. Fine, she huffed, grabbing Evan's arm. Let's go and get this over with, but make it quick. She dragged Evan along with her, her irritation clear. She walked into the grand main hall of the estate, expecting to see a fussy, middle-aged venue manager sitting behind a desk. She was wrong. The atmosphere inside the hall was starkly different from the party outside. It was cold, silent, and tense. The room was lined with men and women in dark, expensive business suits. They stood with their arms crossed, their faces grim and unreadable. They looked like a jury. And at the center of the room, seated in a large throne-like armchair behind a polished mahogany table, was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of immense, unshakable power. His face was calm, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were like steel. This was Samuel Carter. Rachel's arrogant stride faltered. This was not a venue manager. This was someone else entirely. Evan felt a prickle of fear on the back of his neck. He had a terrible feeling that this was not about a payment issue. Hello? Rachel said, her voice a little less certain than before. We were told you wanted to see us? Samuel Carter did not answer immediately. He simply looked at them, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were looking straight through them, weighing and measuring their souls. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of Rachel's nervous breathing. Rachel, ever the social climber, tried to recover her composure. She forced a bright, charming smile onto her face, the same one she used to win over difficult clients and wealthy acquaintances. "Oh, hello," she began, her voice a little too high-pitched. "There must be some sort of misunderstanding. We were just outside talking about how absolutely lovely the venue is. You've done a wonderful job here." Samuel Carter's expression did not change. He did not smile back. He simply watched her, his silence a more powerful rebuke than any words could have been. A cold knot of dread began to form in Rachel's stomach. Her charm wasn't working. "Were you?" Samuel finally said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. It filled the cavernous hall, and every person in the room seemed to lean in to hear it. He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand towards a large monitor that had been set up on one side of the room. An assistant pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life. The video began to play. It was the clip from the caterer's phone. The room was forced to watch Rachel's face, magnified 10 feet high, twisted in a sneer of contempt. They saw her snatch the flowers from Alana's hands. They heard her sharp, cruel voice echo through the silent room. "She's ruining every shot. This isn't a daycare. Look at you, you're completely out of place here." Rachel went pale. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like chalk against her white dress. A wave of nausea washed over her. "Wait," she stammered, her voice shaking. "No, that's taken out of context. You don't understand. The lighting was perfect, and she wandered in." Her excuses sounded weak and pathetic, even to her own ears. The video ended, but the image of her face remained on the screen, a monument to her own ugliness. Samuel Carter leaned forward slightly in his chair. His eyes, which had been cold and distant, now burned with a focused intensity. "Out of context?" he asked, his voice still dangerously quiet. "Enlighten me, Ms. Whitmore. What is the proper context for mocking a child's dress? What is the appropriate situation for humiliating a 10-year-old girl in front of a crowd?" Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind was blank with panic. She looked at the faces of the board members lining the room. They stared back at her, their expressions a mixture of stone-cold judgment and utter disgust. There was no sympathy here. She turned to her new husband, her eyes pleading for help. Evan couldn't meet her gaze. He buried his face in his hands, a gesture of pure, unadulterated shame. He knew. In that moment he knew their perfect day, their perfect life, was over. Samuel Carter was not finished. He leveled his gaze at Rachel, and his next question was delivered like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cutting. "Do you often find it necessary to insult children you don't know?" The question hung in the air, an indictment of her character, her values, her very soul. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Rachel felt the floor beneath her feet begin to crumble. She was no longer a bride in her castle. She was a defendant in a courtroom, and the verdict was already in. Just as the silence in the room reached its breaking point, the grand double doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Alana. But it was not the same girl from the terrace. The simple, tear-stained cotton dress was gone. In its place, she wore a crisp, elegant white dress that looked like it was made for a young royal. Her hair was no longer in a simple ponytail, but was styled beautifully, framing a face that was now calm and composed. Her eyes, once filled with tears, were clear and steady. She held a large, sealed envelope in her hands. A gasp rippled through the room. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "You," she whispered, the single word filled with a dawning horror. This was the same girl. The mess she had wanted out of her pictures, but she was transformed. Samuel Carter rose from his chair. He was a tall man, and his presence seemed to fill the entire room. He walked around the table and stood beside his daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. He looked directly at Rachel, and his voice was clear and resonant, a judge delivering a final sentence. "Rachel Whitmore," he announced, his words ringing with authority. "This is my daughter, Alana Carter." He paused, letting the name sink in. "She was volunteering here today to learn about the work we do, at her own property." The room erupted in a low roar of murmurs. Board members nodded grimly. Evan's head snapped up, his face a mask of shocked comprehension. Rachel swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her mouth. Wait, she stammered, her voice cracking. Your daughter?" The name Carter. It clicked in her mind with the force of a physical blow. Carter Holdings. The real estate empire. The billionaires. Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Yes, my daughter. And the future owner of this estate and everything else you see from here to the horizon." Rachel was speechless. The world tilted, spun, and then crashed down around her. The girl she had mocked, the child she had called out of place, was the heir to a fortune so vast it was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a cataclysmic, life-altering error in judgment. Alana, guided by her father's gentle hand, walked forward. She moved with a quiet confidence that belied her age. She stopped directly in front of the pale, trembling bride. She didn't say a word. She simply held out the envelope. Rachel stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely take it. With numb fingers, she fumbled with the seal and pulled out the contents. It was a check. A cashier's check from a private bank. It was made out to Rosewood Estate Management, LLC, and the amount written on the check was for $5 million. In the memo line, 2 words were printed in crisp, clear type. Full purchase. Rachel's vision blurred. The numbers swam before her eyes. It was real. It was all real. The girl she had humiliated wasn't just a guest. She wasn't just the owner's daughter. She was the new owner. Samuel Carter watched Rachel's face crumble, his own expression unreadable. He let the shock and horror sink in, allowing the full weight of her catastrophic mistake to crush her. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and deliberate, each word a carefully placed stone building the wall of her new reality. "As you may have guessed," he began, addressing not just Rachel but the entire room, "Carter Holdings has been in negotiations to acquire this property for some time. We had planned to finalize the purchase next month." He paused, then looked down at his daughter with a gaze full of pride and affection. "But after the events of this afternoon, my daughter insisted that we expedite the process. She felt it was important to make a point about dignity, about respect, about how we treat people regardless of how they are dressed or what we assume their station in life to be." Rachel was shaking, the $5 million check trembling in her hand like a dead leaf. The reality was a physical blow. The ground she was standing on, the beautiful hall she had rented, the entire fantasy she had paid a fortune to create. It all belonged to the child she had belittled. "So we finalized the purchase an hour ago," Samuel continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This check is merely a formality. Rosewood Estate is now officially a wholly owned subsidiary of Carter Holdings." He turned his full attention back to Rachel, his eyes narrowing. "You stood on my property," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And you disrespected my daughter. You mocked her for her appearance, for the color of her skin, for her very presence. You made her feel as though she did not belong in a place that is now, and will forever be, hers." Rachel tried to speak, to apologize, to beg. I didn't know," she croaked, the words catching in her throat. "I'm so sorry. If I had known who she was—" "And that is the entire problem, isn't it, Ms. Whitmore?" Samuel interrupted, his voice like ice. "You are sorry because you got caught. You are sorry because she is my daughter. You were not sorry when you thought she was just a random kid you could bully without consequence. Your apology is worthless." He took a step closer, and Rachel instinctively shrank back. "You have shown your true character today, and your character has no place here." He turned to the head of his security detail, who had been standing silently by the door. "Mark." The man stepped forward. "Sir?" "Ms. Whitmore and her party's access to this venue and all other Carter Holdings properties is permanently revoked, effective immediately." Rachel let out a small, strangled cry. "No, please. My wedding." Security was already moving, two large, impassive men stepping quietly closer to her and Evan. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no second chances. Her perfect day had just become her public downfall. The finality of Samuel Carter's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Permanently revoked. Rachel's mind reeled, unable to accept what was happening. Her wedding reception was still going on outside. Guests were drinking champagne. A band was waiting to play. This couldn't be real. But Samuel Carter was not finished. He delivered the final, crushing blow. "And to be perfectly clear," he announced, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent hall, "effective immediately, your event privileges are terminated. You and your entire party are to vacate the premises. You are, in short, being kicked out of Rosewood Estate." Gasps filled the room. This was beyond a simple rebuke. This was an eviction from her own wedding. Rachel's knees buckled. If Evan hadn't been standing beside her, she would have collapsed onto the floor. You can't do this," she cried, her voice a desperate, pleading wail. "This is my wedding day." Samuel tilted his head, his expression one of cold, implacable resolve. "I just did," he said simply. The two words were a death sentence to her social standing, her reputation, and her pride. Evan finally broke his stunned silence. He turned on Rachel, his face a mask of fury and shame. "I told you," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "I told you your attitude would ruin us one day. I told you to be nice to people. But you never listen, do you? You always have to be the queen." Outside, the news was spreading like wildfire. Staff members were quietly and efficiently beginning to shut down the party. The champagne service stopped. The music was cut off. Guests, confused and alarmed, began whispering amongst themselves, their phones buzzing with messages and alerts. Then the doors to the main hall were opened, and the scene inside spilled out onto the lawn. The guests watched in stunned disbelief as Rachel Whitmore, the beautiful, arrogant bride, was escorted towards the exit by two stern-looking security guards. Her face was a mess of tears and mascara. Her $40,000 dress now looked like a costume for a tragedy. The same crowd that had chuckled nervously at her cruelty just an hour before now stared at her with a mixture of pity and cold judgment. Cameras, which had earlier been capturing her moments of triumph, now flashed to capture her moment of ultimate mortification. Her humiliation was complete, and it was devastatingly public. As she was led away, a pathetic, sobbing figure, she saw Alana standing by her father's side, watching her go. The little girl's face was not triumphant or smug. It was quiet, somber, and full of a wisdom far beyond her years. In that moment, Rachel understood. She hadn't been punished by a billionaire. She had been judged by a child, and she had been found wanting. After Rachel and her disgraced wedding party had been cleared from the property, a sense of quiet calm settled over the Rosewood estate. The board members, their grim duty done, began to disperse. Samuel Carter, however, was not finished. He had one last piece of business to attend to. He scanned the crowd of remaining staff and guests, his eyes searching. Then he saw her. Emma Lawson, the young waitress, was standing near the back, looking on with wide, uncertain eyes. She had witnessed the entire confrontation in the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. Samuel walked towards her, and the crowd parted before him. Emma froze, her mind racing. Was she in trouble? Was she going to be fired for being a witness? Samuel stopped in front of her. His expression, which had been so hard and unforgiving a moment ago, was now warm and kind. "You're Emma, correct?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emma could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. "I was told," Samuel said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "that when my daughter was upset, you were the one who went to her. You showed her kindness when no one else would. You stood up for her, even when you thought she was just a stranger's child with no one to defend her." He smiled, a genuine, appreciative smile. "That is the kind of character I value. That is the kind of person I want working for my company." He extended his hand. "How would you like a position at Carter Holdings? We have a philanthropic division that could use someone with your integrity and compassion." Emma was stunned into silence. Her jaw dropped. A job? At Carter Holdings? It was a dream she would never have dared to dream. She looked from Samuel's outstretched hand to Alana, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. I... Yes, Emma stammered, finally finding her voice. "I would be honored, Mr. Carter." She shook his hand, her mind reeling. The room, which had been silent, erupted in spontaneous applause. The staff, her former colleagues, cheered for her. It was a moment of pure, unexpected justice. Samuel then turned to address the remaining guests and staff. "I have one more announcement," he said. "To ensure that what happened here today never happens again, Rosewood Estate will be undergoing a change in mission. In addition to being a world-class event venue, it will now also serve our community. Starting next month, we will partner with local charities to host free community events, workshops, and summer camps for underprivileged children right here on these grounds." He placed his hand on Alana's shoulder again. "This new initiative will be named in my daughter's honor, because she has reminded us all of a very important lesson today. This place, and places like it, should be for everyone. No one should ever be made to feel out of place here again." The guests cheered, their applause now thunderous and genuine. The ugly stain of the day had been washed away, replaced by a sense of hope and transformation. A bride's cruelty had inadvertently paved the way for a new legacy of kindness. The humiliation of one had become an opportunity for many. Weeks turned into months. The story of Rachel Whitmore's disastrous wedding became a legend in the city, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and business lunches. Her family, deeply embarrassed and facing financial penalties from a dozen canceled vendor contracts, retreated from the public eye. Rachel's reputation was in ruins. The perfect life she had so carefully constructed had been dismantled in a single afternoon. Evan had left her, unable to stomach the public shame. She had lost everything, all because she couldn't tolerate the presence of a child in a simple dress. Under its new ownership, Rosewood Estate flourished. The lawns seemed greener, the flowers brighter. Emma Lawson, true to Samuel's word, was now the director of community outreach for Carter Holdings. She had traded her waitress apron for a business suit, but her heart was the same. She poured all her energy into the new initiative, creating programs that brought hundreds of children from all walks of life to the beautiful estate. They had art classes by the lake, science camps in the gardens, and reading circles under the old oak trees. It became a place of joy and laughter. One sunny afternoon, Alana walked through the gardens with her father holding his hand. She was no longer just a visitor or a volunteer. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who was home. She watched a group of children laughing as they chased butterflies on the main lawn. "Daddy," she asked softly, her voice thoughtful. "Was it wrong to do that to her? To Rachel?" Samuel stopped and looked down at his daughter. He smiled, a gentle, wise smile. "Justice isn't about revenge, sweetheart," he explained. "Revenge is about causing pain for its own sake. Justice is about restoring balance. It's a lesson. We didn't do it to hurt her. We did it to teach her, and everyone else who was watching, that cruelty has a cost. And that kindness," he squeezed her hand, "has a reward." Alana thought about this for a moment and then nodded, understanding. She looked at Emma, who was helping a small boy plant a sunflower seed in a pot, and she smiled. She now spent many of her weekends at Rosewood, not as an anonymous volunteer, but as a leader, helping Emma design the events for the other children. She was learning the most important lesson her father could ever teach her: that true power wasn't about owning things, but about lifting people up. Never mock someone for where you think they stand. You never know who they are, what they're capable of, or what they might become. They may, in fact, own the very ground beneath your feet. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.